Hi, and welcome to a new episode of Amplify's podcast, the podcast that helps you and your team maximize your potential. We have Caitlin Nguyen. Good day to you, Caitlin. How are you?
Hello. I'm well. So happy to be here.
We want to talk about how e-commerce is redefining the overall pharma value chain and the customer experience.
I look after digital and customer engagement. I've been in the industry for some time. I've had the pleasure to work with different brands, both on the RX side as well as on the OTC side. And it's primarily, the experience with, OTC / more consumer-driven brands that, have sort of infused, let's say, this mindset of bringing the best practices and the ways of thinking into the pharma space to really drive growth, both B2B and B2C. I see e-commerce, as you rightfully mentioned, sort of a new skill, a new capability, right, to really modernize and evolve the mix in marketing and sales in pharma. It may be, let's say, the convergence of healthcare and e-commerce may be seen as sort of uncharted territory. There are not so many books out there. There's no really sort of clear playbook, but it doesn't mean that we don't embark on that, right? And so we think that it's very, very exciting, and it's worth going through the test and learns, the experimentation, to have that sort of very, test and learn mindset. Apply that mindset into e-commerce and working through the various different models that are out there. I do think that it really can add a lot of value, right? And if not, then anything at minimum, it will change, and otherwise it can also disrupt the value chain, right? And if we think about that and we lean into this strategically, what does it mean, for the patient? What does it mean for the doctor? So thinking about the patient experience, thinking about the doctor-customer experience, as well as other stakeholders in the healthcare ecosystem. So it's a very uncharted space, but it's also very exciting with a lot of really interesting opportunities. Patient support, patient access, right? These are, very important topics. It's high on the agenda of a lot of pharmaceutical leaders. And today, if we look at the changing needs and the changing landscape, right, when it comes to the path to either your purchase or to your prescription behavior, it is no longer as simple, it's no longer as linear as it used to be. There are many different touch points, there are many different ways to engage, many different ways to capture at the discovery stage or at the consideration stage or later on. So again, borrowing from the best practices from other industries, I think for leaders in this industry, it's quite critical to think about how that experience could be, and what role we can play as the brand, as the business, as the leader within the ecosystem to define and to develop for the patient, right? So if we think about, of course, there are the known factors, right, of e-commerce, such as convenience, such as perhaps lower cost, but there's also notions such as access, such as the ability to enable different levels of privacy and discretion depending on what therapeutic area that you're in. So there's a lot of value in designing this experience so that it supports the patient where he or she is at in his or her journey of care, of disease management, and we start to see that convergence, right, with the known players that are out there, but also with players who are just at this time stepping into the space and understanding that the models need to be different, the way of looking at data, the way of collecting the data, and the way of analyzing, processing the data is different, and the way of commercial negotiations with the companies need to differ, right? So for this, we like to look at the grand innovator, right? So we like to look at, Amazon, etc., right? Because they are indeed, the trailblazers when it comes to customer experience, innovation, data, and also, pushing the envelope with regards to the commercial relationships with the brands that do business with them. So we take these principles and we try to bring it into the space in order to serve the patient more. On the doctor side, when it comes to engagement, what better ways than to offer them specific tools or otherwise information and insight that helps them to help their patients, right? So we look at it very holistically. If we're able to share any studies, any insight about their patient, right, the consumer, their expectations, their unmet needs, how they, let's say, what is their path, right? How they discover, how they learn, how they educate, how they consider. Do they rely on the advice of their friends and family? Do they really look at ratings and reviews, right? So these are some of the things that we discover as we learn more about the patients, that we learn more about the consumers, and whatever insights that we can share back, with our doctors. Then the doctors are more enabled, right, to support their patients. And it could be in the form of just, insight. It could be some applications that we develop. Again, I think it's just, developing these assets, we call them, right, including the insights to help them to help their patients better. Right. And if, for example, doctors who understand that, okay, my patient will come and see me, I will, make a prescription. The next time it's expected that then that patient will then purchase online, because now the patient understands and the patient can continue to self-care, self-treat, right? So there's also this very valuable notion of adherence, which is also something that's quite important in our industry, right? Compliance and adherence. So there are different modes of adherence, right? And this certainly is one, right? And there's always going to be scenarios, where the patient would need, to further consult with the doctor. So it's not to say that then that journey is cut off, right? We're not, worried about that at all, right? It's really to service both sets of stakeholders.
Talk to me about what the pharmacy, the distributors, or even in many countries, we see that the HCPs are also the point of distribution for some medicines and so on. So I could imagine the objection or the fear from their standpoint of saying, well, this is a business that you are cannibalizing if these customers can now go online and don't need to go to my pharmacy. So how do you see the industry navigating that overall supply chain?
Yeah, I think there will always be an element of that, right? Especially if you have a scenario where you have more of the dispensing behavior on behalf of the doctors. I see it as very much a collaboration and partnership, right? Brand and pharmacy, and brand and doctor and hospitals. So what's really, really interesting is that this anyway will change, right? Today, a lot of the pharmacy partners are still at the very sort of early stages of their maturity and development when it comes to truly online experience, leveraging data, leveraging the analytics, understanding the path to purchase, understanding that consumer journey, and leveraging the data and investing in the data capabilities, right? This is not yet there today. However, we are seeing, pockets of that, across the region. And certainly we look at other global markets. This is where the future is, right? So I think it's really very exciting to see that, this ecosystem is evolving. And when these platforms become more mature, and also, let's say the consumer, the patient becomes more savvy, right? In the same way that he or she now is quite savvy with general online shopping, right? Also, I guess the other factor is that in some countries, the policies are changing, right? Some countries now, we're not allowed to be selling OTCs online. But this is now starting to change, right? OTCs, food supplements, and soon we will, very, very quickly enter the world of where we're not going to be exactly like a pure consumer product, but certainly then in terms of, servicing the needs of the patient, sort of capturing when they experience, especially when it's more acute or, more, let's say, trackable from a digital perspective. This is where, sort of the whole digital ecosystem
right.
and, the platforms come into play, right? It's very interesting to look at, a market like Indonesia, right? Huge country, geographically very, dispersed. And so the topic of patient access is really, really critical, right? Even if you live within metropolitan Jakarta, normally under normal circumstances, you would still be looking at a lengthy travel to visit your doctor. Then you would, be waiting in the waiting room for X amount of time. So the whole process can easily be half a day or more, right? So there's that time convenience factor, and as well as those who live in more remote places. So if you look at the platforms that are, let's say, encouraged and to thrive in Indonesia, it speaks to the fact that as a market, as a country, there is demand and there is appetite, right? To address the notion of access, to address the notion of scalability, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's uber exciting to be, observing how the players like HelloDoc, HelloDoctor, and similar, in terms of how they are developing, right? I think it's also really critical that these are startups, right? And so what is the investment sentiment behind these platforms, right? And so it's uber critical to keep an eye on that and to monitor how that is, right? Also, obviously, the other side of the equation in terms of the other parts of the ecosystem are the pharmacies themselves, right? So you have the chain pharmacies and you also have the independent ones. And, we're starting to see, right, some of these players are indeed, leaning into the space to say, how can I connect that? How can I also bring a little bit more understanding, and how do I connect the telehealth, telemedicine with the purchasing side of that as well? So again, this is all still in development, right? And in test mode, testing, everything from marketing and sales, but also testing the environment, the regulatory and the governmental environment to understand, what can work, what may not work as well. Otherwise, the other countries in the region are we see this across, right? So they're all looking to experiments. They're all looking to see what works, what doesn't work. So I think from a brand perspective, I think it's quite helpful to make those choices and to develop a pilot, right? And to test and learn and look to see where you can scale either within the market or across the markets, right? In a partnership. And in many cases with some of these pharmacy chains, they are also on that journey. So what better way than to go on it together?
Find synergies and do it together, as opposed to creating your own channel distribution, for example, while you could maybe ride the wave with an existing. Makes sense.
In one scenario, you could say that the teams will always be under-resourced, right? Meaning that everybody's really stretched, and the teams that are in place may not have even the right blend of skills that are required for this age of digital and e-commerce transformation. That is a given. It's also quite a challenge to recruit talent, right? There's as you know, talent shortage in this space. So therefore, what companies need to do is they need to take a hard look at where they need to upskill, reskill, right? So unlearn and relearn. Also to have the right balance of bringing the right expertise in, right? So it could be sort of an outside expertise with the view of internalizing that, over a certain period of time. So there are different ways to, let's say, skin that cat. But what I found in terms of an approach that is pragmatic at the same time effective is that it's a leadership topic in this case, right? It's really about having leaders support and empower this agility that we talk about. It is very difficult, right? Break down the silos, say, look, we don't have the headcount, right, to hire all these different roles. So therefore we need to make it work, right? We need this team to work with these other teams in a very collaborative way. It's called teaming up, right? So we don't have the resources today. This is our ambition. And if we stick with the status quo, we'll never be able to make our ambition. So let us team up. How can we team up? Under what use case? So I find it always very, very helpful, right? To really align, to clarify and align that use case, right? Start not too big, right? But not too small either. And aligning on that impact, right? And having the right governance to that. So it's a standard, pilot, proof of concept mode. But obviously in pharma space, it is very, very difficult. But I always say, just because something is difficult doesn't mean you shouldn't do it.
I like the drive.
Yes. I do stay up late at night, worrying about these things, but I also know why I get out of bed and go to work, right?
It is a very
meaningful. What drives us. Yeah.
It is a very meaningful mission.
If it were to be easy, then we wouldn't be having this conversation necessarily.
That would be done already.
Right? Yeah, it would be done already, right? There would be playbooks out there.
Right. Well, you're creating one right now, but yeah.
Well, that's the thing, right? So I like to discuss this with my colleagues and my teams, right, across the roles that I've held. Like, there is no specific playbook for what we're doing. In fact, we're living the playbook. We are creating this playbook as we go along, and we change the pages, we change the chapters as we move along. But there's nothing out there that guides us. So it really boils back to this kind of having this solution growth mindset, right? Creative thinking, solution seekers. So it's these are the softer skills that help to ease the pain in the digital transformation of the industry. But I also had a conversation recently with a couple of folks to say, look, if we know that from a digital transformation perspective, we are more of the laggard type industries compared to other industries, that's okay. That means that then we can fast track. We don't have to start from scratch. We don't have to take X number of years that it took the other companies to. So, let's be really agile learners, right? Was sort of the message when it comes to difficult topics like e-commerce and true omni-channel customer experience, our favorite topics. But yeah, let's really learn and challenge our own sets of perceptions and beliefs as well. Communication and talking a lot. No, I joke about this.
Doing podcasts. You should have done podcasts
What I
earlier in life.
really mean, I know, right? What I really mean is, even if you're an introvert, right? I'm not an introvert, but let's say you're an introvert. If I look back, right, it's really about how you communicate with others, how you share your story. So it's about storytelling, right? Storytelling through data, storytelling just in general, right? So communication, talk to a lot of people to understand, where they're coming from, what their challenges are, what they like, what they don't like. Talk to a lot of different stakeholders, not only within your organization, but outside, right? To learn, right? So it's back to the notion of this learning agility, right? So everything that is not only from your own experience and what you learn in school, but also from others around you, right? So building a community. So extrovert or introvert, build your community,
right?
And continuously improve yourself and your own knowledge base, right? So it's growth mindsets, learning, continuous improvement, adapting, to what's out there. So that would be sort of the best piece of advice.
I love it, yeah, and that's great. I mean, this is resonating a lot. Also for me personally, I mentioned to some friends recently that one of the reasons I do this podcast now is because, to your point, it allows me to meet people, it allows me to learn from them and
Yeah.
I do it because I'm genuinely interested to learn, but also because I think other people are benefiting from it, hence the podcast, right? But for me personally, when I was in my corporate role, having late calls every night with my colleagues in Europe and in the US, not taking the time to go out, do some networking and so on. You talk and you meet people within your direct company ecosystem and stuff like that, but I think it's very healthy for all of us, regardless of how much we work, to also invest some time for self-development and go out there, meet others, and be challenged by.
And that's why I have to thank you, Guillaume, for building this community. I think it's very, very valuable, and we learn from each other, right? And we learn from our experience, we learn from our successes. We can also learn from our failures.
Good. Thank you so much, Caitlin, for accepting to be on the show.
Pleasure.
It was very insightful. Thank you again for watching Amplify's podcast. Don't forget to like, give us some comments, and subscribe, of course. You can find us on YouTube, but also on Spotify, Amazon, Apple, and so on. Thank you very much, and speak to you soon.